The narratives that have been coming out of the Kremlin and Russian state TV since February are aggressive, paranoid, and highly toxic. But how far do they believe these narratives, and how much of this is just an instrument for control and coercion? Was there a point in time where Putin and his minions started to believe their own conspiracy narratives? Or, to some extent, have they always seen the world differently from the West? I'm exploring these paradoxes today with an expert on Russian politics and political culture, Olga Irisova. Welcome to the Silicon Curtain podcast. If you enjoy the material we create, then please like and subscribe to help boost the popularity of our videos in YouTube. Olga Irisova is a German Chancellor Fellow at the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation and Editor-in-Chief at Riddle, Russia. She's an expert on Russian foreign and domestic policy. She has also been a visiting fellow at the Kennan Institute in Washington, D.C., and an analyst at the Center for Polish-Russian Dialogue and Understanding in Warsaw, Poland. Olga, welcome to the channel.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, it's a really great pleasure. But before we dive into some of these sort of deeper topics, do please tell me a bit about your area of expertise and what got you into the subject?
That's a good question. So at least since 2012, I've been researching different official narratives that Kremlin propaganda and Kremlin official media and official figures produces. Why I got interested in this topic? Well, that was back in 2011, 2012, and as you probably remember, that was the time of huge mass protest in Russia. And I was just a young girl. I studied at High School of Economics for my master's degree back to that time, and I lived in Moscow. And I participated in this protest in 2011. And back to the time, Russia was a different country from what it is now. Still, back to the time, we enjoyed some freedom. There were independent media, there were no laws on foreign agents, and we felt that we might change the country for the better. And then after this protest, specifically in 2012, Russian government decided to start a fight with Russian independent media and freedom of expression of Russian people. And that's how I got interested in the topic of how Russian, mainly TV, as the most popular media in Russia, is creating the artificial reality most Russian population have to live in. And I still do believe that even though internet is becoming more and more popular as a source of getting information in Russia, still majority of Russian, around 62%, they say that they got the majority of the news from state-controlled TV. So some people try to underestimate the importance of TV in Russia, but even these people who do not follow the news directly, they still have their TV switch on as a background. So like they're cooking, they're having dinner, and their TV is on. So even though they would say that we don't follow the news closely, but still when the TV is switching on as a background noise, they got the main ideas, and that's how their picture of reality has been created for them for many years.
And it's an ecosystem, isn't it? So even if one person is not watching the news that intently, they'll be talking to friends and relatives who perhaps do. So it's like an entire sort of bubble or ecosystem that helps to propagate those messages around.
Yeah, that's very true. That's a very accurate description. And it's not only TV. So as you know, in 2001, like 1 year after Putin came into the power, he destroyed their independent channel NTV. Then he also destroyed the only independently controlled TV channel, TV Dost. And then the authorities also started to fight with independent media online and with traditional newspapers. So even these people who want to get some alternative, and by alternative, I mean alternative towards the official point of view, if they want to get this type of information, they have to know what they are looking for, and they have to know where to look for this information. Because Russian authorities, they also passed the law on so-called news aggregators and search engines that dictates the sort of search engines such as Yandex to show on their first intro pages only the news from the official media sources that have been registered as official media with Roskomnadzor. And many Russian independent media they have never been registered with Roskomnadzor, and now it's since the start of the war, more than 5,000 websites, media outlets have been blocked in Russia. So the people who look for some information and they type what they want to find in, let's say, Yandex, they would not be they won't be able to find any links to independent media, because these search engines would only show them pro-government official media channels that have been registered by Roskomnadzor. And also some people who would say that they don't follow the news regularly, or they are not interested in the news, still they have, as I said before, the TV or radio working on as a background noise, and that's how they get like the main messages. Also, recently there is like a huge development in educational system in Russia, and now Russian children will have to face with so-called like patriotic lessons, where also the main narratives of Kremlin propaganda would be like propagated towards younger children. And the same goes for the workers, such as like teachers, medical workers who have to work for the government. They also have to listen to these like patriotic channels from their bosses. And of course, older generations are more exposed to Kremlin propaganda on TV, and this older generation then start to spread the information towards their children and grandchildren. But we can also see that younger generations of Russians, they are fortunately not so predisposed to believe in official narratives. They are way more critical toward the Kremlin, toward the war, and towards everything that is going on in Russia.
And that demographic split is interesting, isn't it? Because yes, there will be every age group watching television, but actually, typically the age groups of sort of 45 and above are much more likely to watch television, aren't they? And if you're below that age group, then you're more likely to get either a plurality of news sources or even just to go to the internet and get your news. Is it also not true that there are very different views people will hold, you know, pro or anti-war, pro or anti-Kremlin, based on where they get their news from?
Yeah, that's accurate. But I would also say that this division line starts from the age of 55, not 45.
Oh, 55. Okay.
Yes, 55. And people who are older than 55 years old, they predominantly just watch the TV, and that's how they got exposure towards the Kremlin narratives. And we are in different types of social service, we see that this demographical group, they are more predisposed to supporting Putin, to voting for United Russia ruling party. And at the same time, they are the ones who would say that they support so-called special operation. And the younger the audience is, especially those who are younger than 25, they're, first of all, yes, they get their news from TV or Telegram, but at the same time, they're less politically active. They are more frustrated with what's going on, just because they don't see the clear picture of future for them. They are depressed because they do understand, most of them do understand that the prospects for them living in this Russia are not that good. It's the choices are rather limited. Either you're work, if either you go and work for the government you don't want to support and you don't support, or you have to leave Russia. But now with all of these talks about visa ban and the inability of Russians to pass international language exams inside of Russia, this option is becoming more and more restricted. So that's why these demographic, they tend not to follow the news on a regular basis, just because they feel helpless. They don't feel that they can change anything. And that's why they're not that politically active. The most politically active and opposition-minded group, I would say these are people of between 25, 35, those who are on the early ages of their career. They do understand that the prospects for them are also very limited under the current leadership of Vladimir Putin. At the same time, they already have some finances, some work, mortgages, apartments, so they have something to lose. And that's why they're more caring about what's going on. And starting from the February 24th, we've also observed that the number of VPN users in Russia has skyrocketed, now around from 17 to 20%, according to different estimates, of Russian internet users are using VPN services in order to access the content that has been blocked in Russia. And I would assume that this number would only grow.
And I think there's something that's not that well understood amongst, Western commentators in the media, because they constantly say, well, if only Russians had accurate information. Well, actually, a lot of people are getting information, aren't they? And there are many, many news sources in Russian, run by dissident Russians now, mostly outside of the country, of course, but which people can access and view. And in fact, if you look at the viewing figures on YouTube for Navalny's channel and for many of the other channels that have been set up, Dozhd has recently, reformed online, and that's getting huge viewing figures. You've got the famous satirist Viktor Shenderovich, you've got Khodorkovsky, you've got a whole range of channels getting massive audience figures for actually very long political discussions. Their videos run 40 minutes, an hour. No Western audience has the patience to do that. So clearly there's a huge hunger to consume facts and information. But Kremlin propaganda doesn't try to convince you, does it, of its point of view? A lot of the propaganda is actually targeted at indifference or preventing people from taking action. So you may have millions of people with information, knowing what's going on, but they're not organized. And the propaganda isn't trying to convince them they're wrong or there isn't a war or these kind of things. It's convincing them that action is futile, that organization is futile. And it's also trying to create an environment of terror so they don't say anything. Is that a accurate picture of what's going on?
Yes, on the one hand, it's absolutely accurate picture. For many years, Kremlin propaganda have been trying to portray Russian dissenters as those who are in the minority, so that people who feel that they cannot support the Kremlin or Putin, they feel that they are lonely. Like, for example, that might be the person, especially living in Russian regions, and this person does not support the war and is super depressed about everything that is happening. But at the same time, this image that Kremlin propaganda has been creating of foreign agents, of Western spies, and this division between we and we should be united around the Kremlin, and them, those who work for the West, who are spies, who are foreign agents. And the person understands that clearly if she or he expresses this dissatisfaction with what's going on inside of Russia, who expresses anti-war beliefs, he might be perceived by others as a traitor, as a national traitor, as a foreign agent, as a someone whose loyalty is lies within like the Western part of the world and not inside of Russia. So these people, they feel that they don't have the right to raise their voices just because they are afraid of doing that. And also they are afraid that they are a minority. They are afraid that no one around them expresses and has the same beliefs and same opinions, which is not the case. But that's what the Kremlin propaganda did. It managed to disintegrate, to create this split between the Russian society and those who do not support what's going on. They feel that they are minority, while in reality we don't know the real figure, the real number of those who who are not satisfied. But also when it comes to your point that there are so many independent media channels and people who want to follow independent media, they have an opportunity to access this media. Well, on the one hand, it's true, but on the other hand, many people in Russia, they feel underrepresented by this media because all of these media that you mentioned, like Khodorkovsky, Novaya Gazeta, and other media, they target the Russian liberal-minded minority.
Liberal intelligentsia, sort of small percentage of the population.
Yes, especially those living in Russian big cities, especially in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. And even the language that this media are speaking with their audience, it's not a relevant language for the majority of Russians, even those who dissatisfy with the regime. Like these media are mimicking the language and the agenda of Western liberal media, and they might talk about liberalism, they might talk about cancel culture and about different things like that. While people in Russian regions, they mostly care about their regional affairs, about economic situation, about their everyday life. And there are not that many independent media who are ready to address these topics and who are also ready to speak to these people using their own languages. Also, in my own research, I see that there are so-called like positive triggers and negative triggers that media can use in order to address the audience. And by negative triggers, I mean something that provoke the negative reaction from the audience. Like, for example, there might be people, and there are these people, especially like in Russian regions, who are interested in getting the independent news about domestic politics, about economic situation, but at the same time, they are not that ready to hear the word war or hear the, not Ukrainian, but like a real, to learn the real picture of what's going on.
Yes.
And if we try to push our anti-war agenda towards these people, they would just shut down.
Yeah. And in fact, Khodorkovsky and others, they're going further. And I'm not going to criticize it because it's a valid debate, but stopping the war is one level. They've started to talk about the federalization of Russia, almost the collapse of the federal system. They've started talking about, republics descending into sort of chaos and seceding. So they've gone beyond that to another level of conversation, which obviously it has some validity because the crisis might push, some, more existential crisis for the political institutions in Russia. But as you say, people in the provinces or right across Russia, I mean, that's not a conversation they necessarily want to hear. And that might provoke an immediate sort of negative reaction from them.
Yeah, that's there too. And that's how I would say, if we want to address larger audience in Russia, we should pick up the correct language in order to talk to these people. And also we should focus on the topics that these people are interested in. Because when we speak about economic problems, about the effect of sanctions on Russian people, that's how we get the attention of the people who are dissatisfied with the economic situation. And then eventually we might start talking with these people when we gain their trust, and then we can start talking to them about other things, such as the war in Ukraine, federalization, corruption, and other pressing topics on Russian agenda.
So this could be things like local corruption, the incompetence of local politicians, the state of the roads, hospitals, all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because almost everybody's been sanctioned. Almost every public commentator is now either outside the country, in jail, or as a foreign agent and being shut down. There's one of my favorite bloggers, which is Varlamov, Ilya Varlamov, who's a urbanist. Yes, he's quite political, but he's not aligned with one political group. But many of his videos tackle these local topics. He visits local towns, he talks about local stuff. And I know there's been a conversation there about why has he not been sanctioned? And I don't know, you probably don't have an answer to that one, but is it the kind of topics he's talking about that could be a great way to engage people in those conversations? The state of their towns, residential buildings, getting clean water supplies, these kind of, and urban aesthetics. Is that a better way to engage with people?
Yes, these topics might attract more attention, and at the same time, that Russian economy is struggling right now, and people are worried about inflation, about rises in prices. So that's the topics that independent media can address in order to gain more viewership from the larger audience. Also, people are worried about unemployment, and when the Western companies close down their branches in Russia, many people found themselves without being jobless, and this is also the huge problem right now in Russia. Then there is also a problem with the pharmaceutical market. Not all the medical drugs and medical procedures are available in Russia because of the sanctions. And the people who experience the lack of necessary medications, they also find themselves in a hard state of physical and mental state, and at the same time they feel lonely. But if the media would allow them to feel that they are not alone who experience this type of problems, and then they can later show the link between what's the decision that Putin made to start the war in Ukraine, and the consequences that the pharmaceutical crisis is also consequences of this decision, and then the decision of 2014 of annexation of Crimea. So that's how we can address this topic. So people need to understand why it matters for them, why and how it affects their everyday life. And also people need to have a positive agenda, at least. We cannot just describe problems. We also need to give people hope, because those Russians who already understand everything, they are mostly depressed, deeply depressed and anxious, because yes, we do understand that there is a war going on, but we cannot change the regime. We've tried, but we failed. And this state of hopelessness, there is a concept of learned hopelessness. It's paralyzing. And in order for people to be more active, we need to give them a clear picture that there is a hope for them in the future, that situation might be changed, that there is something for them in the future. And that's also very important for the media to do, to create this image of the future.
And it is depressing and isolating, isn't it? Because if you are somebody who is proud of your literature and your history in a country, and yet you are sort of liberal, living in the middle of all this, it's a terrible place to be. You have no power to change events and control them, and there's very little sympathy in the world generally at the moment for Russia, or even Russians collectively. All the sympathy is going to Ukrainians, and that's kind of understandable. It must have been very similar being, a German liberal in 1942 or 44 and just seeing, the world end in that way. But turning back to propaganda, I think, because some of the stuff you talked about, isolation, is really interesting when it comes to the mechanics of propaganda. And of course, when it looked like Lukashenko's regime in Belarus was on the verge of collapse, the protests were gaining huge traction, weren't they? And he was starting to lose control of events. But then they fired all the local propagandists and they exported teams from Moscow to completely change the strategy. And the strategy was then switched not to convince people Lukashenko was good or right or any of that. They cynically turned it towards saying, well, actually, yeah, maybe the protesters are right, but there aren't enough of you. And if you carry on doing this, terrible things are going to happen. So could you describe a little bit about how that propaganda machine works and how it managed to stop revolution in Belarus from going further?
So to begin with, I'm not a specialist in Belarus, but I can just express my own ideas about what has happened, and knowing how Russian propaganda works inside of Russia. I would say that Russian propagandists are very skillful and very flexible. When they see that the total narrative does not work, they immediately switch into another narrative, and that's how it works. Even with pro-war narratives after February this year, because they started to talk about demilitarization and denazification on the first hand, but then they understood that the audience didn't buy this narrative, and that's how they switched into anti-NATO narrative and almost stopped talking about demilitarization and denazification. So when it came to Belarus, as far as I understand, their main narrative that they tried to push there was that, yes, Lukashenko might be a bad guy. The election probably were manipulated. But if it's not for Lukashenko, then Putin would go and take Belarus. And they made this artificial choice. It's either we are independent country with Lukashenko, or we would be a part of Russia. So they make this, they made it look like there was no possible good scenario for Belarus. And that's what they usually
lose-lose scenario, kind of.
Yes, that was a lose-lose scenario. Although there is an expression, I don't know how to translate it in English. It's it was a deal with Satan, a deal with the devil.
Yeah.
Something like that. It's Putin or Lukashenko, or Putin. At least this guy, the bad guy, was our guy. And that's actually what troubles me now with all of these visa ban talks, because I see that Russians living in Russian regions who have never voted for Putin, and they are completely dissatisfied, and they don't like what's going on in Ukraine. They don't support the war. But at the same time, when they hear these visa ban talks, they feel betrayed. They feel even more isolated. They feel like they tried to change the country, but they failed. But at the same time, the West also didn't help them to change the country, like in 2011, 2012. Also, when we had this mass protest, but then the West recognized Putin's elections as legitimate. And these people are now dissatisfied with the West as well. And they're also having this choice. It's okay, we see that we've been certain that we have a evil bad guy for many years, but now we also feel that the West are the bad guys. So it's like the choice, our bad guy or not our bad guy.
And in fact, that narrative itself could easily have been created by the propagandists, because they will even create narratives supposedly against themselves, but which are designed to create indifference. So it's not without reason that this might not be an organic point of view. This could have been seeded as well.
It's mostly organic. From what I've seen, it's mostly organic, just because that's like from the psychological point of view, people they need to belong to some big group, and this Russian, not only liberals, but like pro-democratic forces, or just the ordinary people who are not politically active, but they are not satisfied with what's going on in Russia, who do not support Putin. They never felt that they belong in Russia, just because Kremlin propaganda portrayed them as traitors or as a like significant internal other. And for many years, they built their identity on the proximity to European Union.
Yes.
It's like, yes, we are Russian Westerners, we are Russian Europeans. And now they feel that the West denies them of this right to identify with itself. So they feel like they got rejected from both sides.
It's very emotional though, isn't it? I mean, I've had some arguments with people about this one, because it's an issue I don't know my own point of view actually on this, but I find whenever you speak to people about this, you almost can't have any kind of rational conversation. It's almost like passion immediately comes to the surface and any kind of nuance of rationality goes out of the window. So you're right. I think this issue above all seems to just enrage people. And yet, taking a step back, if I wanted to get a visa to come and live and work in Russia, I mean, it's very unlikely I'd be able to get one. So again, there's this reciprocity. There's this weird assumption on the part of, as you say, Russian intelligentsia, that almost there's a right to become part of the Western European community, but that's in no way reciprocal. If I wanted to go the other way, but didn't want to be a propagandist, there's no way I could go and live and settle in Russia. So it's a very odd debate.
Yeah, that's true, but you see, like the whole debate goes like that, that Russians perceived, and they know that the West is democratic and liberal society, and Russia is authoritarian society. So that's why we cannot compare the rules of the games in both parts. So if it's bad inside of Russia, it doesn't mean that it should be the same, and the West should treat people from Russia the same as Russian authorities are treating people from the West, but also from inside of Russia. So like that's the
But if I said to them,
difference.
like, well, what about the liberal Iranians? What about the liberal Nigerians? What about the liberal Saudis and the liberal? Let's let all the liberals from all the countries of the world in. Why not? I mean, I find this a really interesting topic, because it's the one topic that Kremlin propaganda can really work with, isn't it? Because it just seems to evoke so much emotive passion and so little rational debate.
Yeah, but what bothers me is that this European part of Russian identity can be easily eroded if Russians will feel excluded from the West.
Yeah.
So I do understand some rational ideas behind visa ban, but at the same time, when applying for visa, this process might be followed closely by Western security services in when the person's document are being observed. So it doesn't mean that we need to like have a visa ban in order to increase the security measures inside of European Union, because yes, like Russian agents of influence. This is a big problem for the West and for other countries as well. And I do believe that the West should do more in order to build up its security measures against the Russian influence operations and
influencers and agents and active measures.
Yes. But this problem might be solved on the process of obtaining the visas, when diplomats would look closely into the data and like CV and social media of applicants. So like there are some solutions, but like the whole this event thing, it triggered these very bad feelings inside of Russian intelligence. But mostly what I see now is that like Russian propaganda is trying to exploit this topic, but the movements and the conversations and the disputes among Russian intelligence in social media, they are genuine. Just people got so scared, got so emotional, but mostly they don't blame the West. They don't blame, of course, they cannot blame Ukraine. No one can blame Ukraine for what's going on or for what Zelensky said, because most people they do understand that Ukraine is fighting the war against Russia, and it's only like normal thing to say and to propose. But most people inside of Russia, they are dissatisfied with Russians living outside of Russia who support visa ban. So that's the most triggering topic, and that's also like it's a dividing topic inside of Russian opposition circles.
That'd be quite alienating, wouldn't it? And a lot of the commentators I watch I can see divided on this topic. They don't quite know what to think and what to say. I mean, the other option, of course, is to seek asylum. But do you think there's a real emotional reason why the sort of intelligentsia within the country still we're talking about would not even consider the asylum option? Because a political asylum is something that you could gain, but you would have to, in effect, burn your bridges. And, at least in the near term, you'd have no hope of being able to return. I mean, is that one reason, again, why? I mean, my understanding is that it's not just tourist visas they're talking about here, is that people see a tourist visa as a way to have a halfway house, to come out of the country, try and establish yourself, look around, make contacts, and see if you could then seek asylum. It's almost seen like a sort of a way out, or a way to keep your options open.
So first of all, like it's not that easy to ask for asylum for Russian people, and in previous years only a tiny minority of application for political asylum made by Russians in European Union were satisfied, and around like from 80 to 90% were denied. And in order to ask for asylum, you need to go to the European Union country. In order to get European Union country, you should have a tourist visa. You should have a Schengen visa.
You have to get there in order to do that.
Yes, because you cannot board a plane without having a Schengen visa. So that's why it is very important for Russians to have this opportunity of obtaining even short-term Schengen visas, so that they can land in the European Union or in another country and ask for political asylum. Then there is also a problem of if people would ask for political asylum, that would mean that they have to get rid of their Russian passports, and they would become stateless. And
huge step, and then property they might have, their flats, their property, their possessions, or even their relatives. That's it. They're severing all connection to everything they've earned and worked for and built up, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's not only about like tearing up all your connection with the current country, because many people inside of Russia, they're not dreaming of like living somewhere else. They would prefer to live inside of Russia, but inside of like normal democratic Russia. And still people hope that one day this time would come and they would be able to come back and try to make a difference inside of Russia, try to rebuild it, try to make it better, try to make it more democratic. And without Russian passports, that would be tricky. So that's the second reason why people don't want to apply for political asylum. And so what was then the third reason? I was thinking about something third. Okay, but these 2 points would be also enough.
And I'm worried about family as well, of course, because that's the other thing people don't talk about, is that you might leave, you may or may not be sort of vocal politically, but if you still have family in the country, they may well come under threat. They may come under observation. All your communications will probably be monitored. So there's a real fear, isn't there, that will prevent people from being active politically?
I would say those who are politically active, they do that just because they cannot do otherwise. They cannot keep silent. And yes, they do understand that there might be some pressure on their family who are still inside of Russia. But after the start of the war, many families inside of Russia split apart. Older generations, like parents and grandparents, they tend to be more less skeptical towards what's going on. They either support the so-called special operation, or they would say that they don't know what's best for the country, but they believe that the professionals, the government, the officials know what's best for the country. So, but it's also sort of support. And younger generations, so these grandchildren and children, are more skeptical, and just people stop talking to each other altogether because the issue itself, it's so emotional, it provokes so many emotions from both sides. And those who already left, I don't think that that their families might have done something in order to stop them from leaving. Of course, they are all worried about their families, but mostly they're worried not for the fact that these families would be under pressure in Russia, but people are worried that they won't be able to visit them, they won't be able to see them. And we now see that Russians residing outside of Russia, they have to meet with their families in the countries where Russians can go without visas, such as like Georgia, Armenia, Turkey.
And let's talk a bit about the mechanics of the sort of propaganda TV shows, because I find the format quite fascinating, because it's not the case that you'll get voices all saying the same thing, trying to put a certain point of view. Often they will have dissenting voices in there. They'll have staged arguments, won't they? Like almost like a sort of, I call it a puppet show, but they will have different points of view. And some of those points of view can be very much even against the sort of, the regime's point of view. It creates a kind of hybrid sort of media space, doesn't it? Which behind the scenes is more or less controlled, and who goes on there is very tightly controlled, and what they say is controlled. But it creates this almost like a Potemkin media, a sort of illusion of plurality. Do you know much about how that's sort of constructed and how that works? And what effect does it have on people hearing dissenting voices in these kind of formats?
So you're referring to political talk shows, and these talk shows, they
Kseniya Kirillova and all those kind of Kirillova.
So these talk shows, they became more and more popular and widespread after 2014, after annexation of Crimea. But still, I would say that the classical news shows are more popular in terms of like spreading the messages around in Russia, because for many people who are not like hardcore supporters of Putin, these political talk shows are too aggressive, because when you watch these political talk shows, that people are screaming there, and people are cursing, people are humiliating each other, and yes, sometimes there are dissenting voices, voices opposing the official narrative. But whether these all a stage or some of these voices are genuine voices, that's a hard question, because I've asked several people who participate in this show as with opposing views, and I got the feeling that yes, some of them, they just play their role, but some of them genuinely, but it was like a few years ago, they still genuinely believe that it's better for them to speak the truth, so that at least like the part of the audience of these channels would hear another voice, would hear a different opinion, and they felt that that's their duty, that they have to do that. I don't think that it's a fruitful and useful strategy, to be honest, but still there are reasons behind this behavior and behind the participation in these talk shows might be different. But yes, you're absolutely right that these like pluralistic environment, seemingly pluralistic environment, it creates the image that we have freedom of speech, and that's what usually commentators and like pro-Kremlin commentators and hosts of these TV shows, they say that like, you see, we have freedom of speech, and people can speak anything they want here in our media, and in the US media or in British media, there is no freedom of expression, freedom of speech, because they all speak like in pro-liberal manner. So that's actually one of the focal points of Kremlin propaganda, is like, yes, we do have the freedom of media, and the West does not have it.
I mean, if only that was true. I mean, that would be great if all the media was liberal, but unfortunately, we have lots of right-wing media and left-wing media and centrist. I mean, we have a fairly chaotic mix of voices, and probably far too much control by the more right of center. But I can see how that works, doesn't it? Again, it creates a kind of indifference. It creates this idea that we're bad, but it's the same everywhere. So why fight?
And also it creates this illusion that the truth as a concept does not exist. So everyone lies, everybody lies, everybody tries to push their own agenda, and there is no like genuine thing as truth or facts.
And that's probably one of the most effective propaganda tools, isn't it? Because that works very well also with the alt-right and the hard left in the West. And these are great pockets of very loud, very active people, especially on social media. And you find a lot of sort of Kremlin propaganda narratives entering into what they're saying, especially the ones that are designed to, criticize Western media, criticize Western politicians. You can see these propaganda narratives being really quite effective amongst a certain segment of the Western audience.
Yeah, that's true. But also, I would say that sometimes it's very hard to distinguish between the genuine dissatisfaction of people in the West with Western governments, because everyone has the right to be dissatisfied, to oppose something, to be unpleased with something, and those who have been affected by Kremlin propaganda. And I would say that the marker of like one of the features of those who might have been affected by Kremlin narratives, these are people who support different types of conspiracy theories, because Kremlin has been very skillful in like promoting and playing in different types of conspiracy theories. And unfortunately, sometimes the Kremlin goes too far. And for example, all sorts of conspiracy theories, they are flourishing even inside of Russia. And sometimes these narratives backfire. And we all have seen that during the COVID-19 pandemic, when Russians didn't want to get vaccinated because this anti-vaxxer movement was gaining momentum in Russia, and it was so, and it is still so popular. And that's how sometimes even the Kremlin narratives can backfire. And the funny story, I remember that sometimes the Kremlin propaganda aimed at Western audience created these conspiracy theories against vaccines, and then Russian media, not like some niche media, they started to translate these articles from English, Spanish, and other languages that Russian propaganda work in, and they translated these languages into Russian, and these articles went viral inside of Russia, like proving the point of view of anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theories, such as like, you know, even in the West, people do understand that we should not be vaccinated.
That's it. And an earlier one was climate denial as well. There have been some research links between, climate denying conspiracy theories, anti-vax conspiracy theories, and it's very difficult to really trace the source of those, isn't it? But there is some connection that, there has been a propaganda element in helping to maybe not create them, but to amplify them and to weaponize those points of view.
I would be very careful when saying, like, when trying to portray everything that Kremlin media channels and bots and trolls are saying. I wouldn't call everything that they are saying as weaponizing something. So sometimes when, in the case of so-called trolls and bots operating on social media, so these are the people who have to push certain narratives, but sometimes they also need to create some posts that would portray them as ordinary people. And sometimes these people, they just speak from their heart. And given that all sorts of conspiracy theories are that popular in Russia, I wouldn't be that surprised when these like anti-vaxxers or flat earth conspiracy theories, they would just like push what they genuinely believe in, apart from pushing the Kremlin narrative that they have to push as a part of their work.
Yeah.
So it's a bit tricky to understand when it was intentional or unintentional.
That's a really, really interesting point, and I've argued with people a lot about this, and I wonder myself. So I know Russia Today is sort of blocked now, and that's no longer such an effective media channel, certainly in the UK. But back when in Russia Today was broadcasting, I always wondered, there were genuinely a lot of journalistic coverage on the channel. They had to create the impression that it was a sort of vibrant journalistic platform. And I always wonder, what is the percentage? What is the percentage of that sort of, targeted message, almost like the amount of sugar you need to swallow the very bitter pill? I never really understood what the percentage was. But it was quite an alluring, quite an effective medium, wasn't it?
Yes, but we would never know what the percentage of the TV airtime is devoted to the messages that have been prescribed for this media to spread, and what is just like the genuine editorial policy. So we know that when it comes to media operating inside of Russia, they have weekly meetings with representatives of presidential administration, where they get like the main focal points. So they don't get the scripts, but they got the main focal points. And then it's up to these propagandists, these so-called like journalists and TV producers and writers to create the material based on these focal points. But also sometimes some like propagandists, knowing what Kremlin wants or what is the main Kremlin narrative and line is, they might also create their own sub-narratives that would serve on purpose for promoting the big narrative. So yeah, that's how it works. But when it comes to RT and also Sputnik, I would say that the picture that they built, it was professional, you know, like when we didn't pay, when we don't pay attention to the content and to the words and just look at the picture and how it is done, and like some documentaries that RT has been doing, they look professional. And sometimes people who just have a rest at the hotel, and they used to switch on the TV and there was RT, and that was like the first time when they saw RT, and it was like, yeah, it looks professional, it should be credible. So in that case, Russian propagandists, they made a good job with creating RT because it was very appealing for different types of audience. So also like different sorts of RT channels operating in different languages, and the same goes for Sputnik. They managed to address different language audiences with different messages, taking into consideration some local specifics.
Absolutely. And another, I think another interesting device there as well, isn't it, is that it didn't have to necessarily be propagandist. It didn't have to necessarily tell lies, even for minority of the time. All it had to do was focus on issues that divided people in a particular country. So in France, it's Yellow Jackets. In the UK, it could be Brexit, it could be Scottish independence. So they can report relatively objectively, but editorially, they're choosing issues that are going to divide the country they're targeting. So it's a very, if you're amoral and all you want to do is damage your enemy, it's an extremely effective medium, isn't it?
It is extremely effective. And that's basically why I don't say disinformation and I'm saying propaganda, because like the term propaganda, it does not necessarily mean like lying. Propaganda means like spreading certain point of view or like certain narrative, while disinformation means spreading fakes and false narratives. But when it comes to like Russia Today and other Russia propaganda media channels, we should also talk about misinformation, because while disinformation is intentional lying, misinformation might be unintentional, because some journalists, Western journalists working for Russian propaganda media outside of Russia, they might genuinely believe in these conspiracy theories, or they might genuinely believe that coverage of Yellow Jackets or some other pressing issues is a good journalist work. And they don't feel that they are lying. They might think that they are doing some good work, but at the same time, it's all about pushing the certain narrative. It's all about cherry picking. It's all about putting one problem and one point of view into focus, while keeping silent about other issues. Like, for example, right now, when you have a look at Russian media, Russian pro-Kremlin media operating inside of Russia, when they're talking about crisis, they're talking about economy, but mostly they are talking that sanctions are hurting Western people, that this would be the people in the West who would like freeze during the winter. And there is like the word, the economic crisis, but they use it only in order to portray what's happening in the West.
Exactly, using truth, but getting to people on a very emotive individual level. And it's not lies, it's not incorrect. It's just that there are other considerations, political considerations, which people don't always have at the front of their minds. Well, let's end on a more positive note, and I'm going to ask a sort of a question about journalistic sort of standards. And I spoke to the co-founder and director of the Mikhailo School of Journalism in Ukraine, and he was telling me a really interesting story about how they got going. When they started up, they obviously inherited Soviet techniques. There's all these sort of Soviet techniques of journalism. There are a lot of older generation of journalists who've come up through that system. They made the conscious decision to completely throw all of that in the bin and to only start with colleagues who are young, in their 20s and 30s, and to write their training manual for their institute literally from scratch, and to go and look around the world to find templates or models that were perhaps working well in some countries and not working so well in others, but they decided to start from scratch. What is going to be the future of Russian journalism? And this is very optimistic, but if Putin's deposed and there is an element of freedom to reset journalism in Russia, is there anything that can be learned from the Ukrainian model?
In Russian case, we should clearly distinguish between propagandists and journalists. And even under the current circumstances and de facto censorship, there are still great journalists working inside of Russia and working outside of Russia. And especially, we all know names of investigative journalists who put under light Putin's corruption, Medvedev's corruption, and Putin's
Nova Gazeta, and great journalists working for that, yeah.
Yes, like Nova Gazeta, Media Zona, Meduza, and many other independent media and individual journalists. So if there is, or when, I'm trying to be optimistic, when there is a chance, I do believe that most of these people, they would go back to Russia to build new journalist school. And now you've probably also heard that some Russians outside of Russia, they've launched independent university. And there is a school of journalism in this independent university, and people from independent media, young investigative reporters, also experienced journalists, experienced editors, they are going to teach young generation of people online free of charge. And that's the basis for a new school of journalism in Russia. And those Russian so-called journalists working on Russian TV, in the future, we would all need to think how we can distinguish their role in this information war, in this brainwashing of Russian society, because clearly those who are hosting these political aggressive talk shows, they are partially responsible, and I would say not even responsible, but guilty for what's happening inside of Russia and in Ukraine as well. But those people who, let's say, work only on culture segment of news, and they've never covered politics or anything like that, probably they should be treated differently from the political TV show hosts.
Well, on that sort of much more positive, and let's hope is going to be the reality soon, I think that's probably a good place to draw it to a close. I'm massively grateful for you to spend the time speaking to me. It's been really fascinating as well, Olga. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.